Welcome to Keeping the World Company on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. This episode is called, Will Trump Really Attack Iran? And what will the consequences be? Our co-host for the show is Tim Apicella. Our guests for the show are Ben Davis, University of Toledo School of Law, Gene Rosenfeld, independent scholar, Manfred Henningsen, Emeritus Professor of Political Philosophy, UH Manoa. Welcome to you all to the show. Gene, let me start with you. What's the situation in Iran right now? Give us a drone's eye view of what's happening on the ground there. How is the political dynamic doing?
In general, since the terrific demonstrations that broke out and have appealed to all of the people in the world and the thousands of protesters that were summarily executed and imprisoned, the populace is very restive. Presumably, this is because of economic failures of the regime. It's a theological regime. It's based on Islamic values as they see them as Shiites, and not on some kind of equity and parity for people there. So the women in particular have demonstrated many times they feel very oppressed. So in general, I would say that people in Iran, most likely a large contingent of them, a significant plurality, are depressed. As far as changing anything is concerned, though, not very hopeful. It is an extremely militarized situation for those who disagree with the government or the theology. And it is an amazing culture because it's one of the great cultures of the world. And they know better. They know that there's a better world out there for them. And a lot of the people in the cities are very sophisticated. The world is demonstrating in favor of the people of Iran, certainly not for the regime. And Trump is threatening the regime. And he doesn't have a lot of support for that because the Middle East is a very volatile region. And it's a difficult situation militarily. It's not like Venezuela at all. It is a major state. It has a very strong guard and army. It can retaliate against American bases. It's a large landmass and difficult to pacify. So it's a quandary. And militarily, it's complicated. The people want regime change. There's no easy way to get that, and the world is on their side.
Manfred, you were speaking before the show about the reaction in Europe, especially in Munich, where 200,000 people showed up to protest against the theocracy. Can you talk about that, and how effective is that?
The majority of these 200,000 people at the demonstration in Munich had Iranian background. They were refugees from after the fall of Mossadegh in the 50s, and many of them were born in Germany. So what you have there is a demonstration also of the large presence of people with migrant background in Germany today. Germany's the population, the migrant background of the population is bigger in Germany than in the US. But now, what was interesting when you read German newspapers about the demonstration was that the majority of them were people with ethnic Iranian background. And the normal protest crowd that you have in demonstrations, especially against Israel, didn't show up. And people wanted to know, some of the commentators wanted to know, what is the reason for this unwillingness of people who are willing to protest whenever Israel does something violent, that they don't show up to protest similar violent actions in countries like Iran or, in Sudan, Southern Sudan, or in Myanmar or wherever. So far, there is no answer an agreed upon answer by people. But what was interesting was that the son of the Shah, Buffalo, who was there, got a lot of applause. But it's questionable whether he would get the same kind of support, overall. I think that was more or less a recognition of his willingness, to speak up against the clerical regime in Iran itself. So I don't think the fact that he got a lot of applause in Munich from that huge crowd doesn't mean that he will return as a successful and victorious Shah to Iran if the regime falls after an military intervention of the United States.
I want to ask you about the possibility of regime change. How do you do regime change with a country like Iran? Is that really possible? Or are we whistling in the wind to think that we can change the theocracy? What do you think, Ben?
I think there are about 90 million people in Iran. I have a feeling that I'm kind of watching some kind of surreal play where I don't know exactly, or I don't feel comfortable knowing exactly what all the moving parts of this particular game are. I'm not convinced that there's really anything the West can do that can lead to substantive improvement of the lives of the average Iranians as compared to the current regime, or that the current regime will do anything that'll improve the substantive life of the average Iranian. I feel like this is a lot of machinations around oil, but less to do with anything to do with meaningful change for the people who are in the streets suffering under the economic burdens of the current situation. I mean, maybe I'm just naive, but I wasn't alive when Mossadegh happened, but I was in Paris when Khomeini came to power in '79. Or no, actually, I guess it was a little later than that. I went to Paris, and there was the move then. I've been watching these various, what was it, the Iran-Iraq war was the thing that went on for about 8 years. You've seen a lot of turbulence, okay, related to Iran over the past. And So my gut reaction to all of it is that um, meaningful improvement to the lives of the people suffering in the streets, uh, I don't see it coming from the West or from the current leadership there. I think it's like a class battle up here, as opposed to something that's going to actually improve the lives of the people who are suffering. But maybe I'm just wrong.
Well, how do you do regime change? Does it mean you have to knock off the leader? Does it mean you have to, take over the government offices? Does it mean you have to have a kind of a civil war? What does it mean in a country like Iran, if
Well,
it's possible at all?
I mean, if we want to look at this classic neo-colonial visions of what happened all across lots of Latin America and Africa, right, is you put in a puppet, right? You pick your puppet and you put in your puppet, and you finance the puppet, and the puppet goes ahead and puts in place some equivalent of the secret police, like the Savak back in the days of the Shah, who enforces uh, his or her authority. Usually, they end up being fairly corrupt, and they don't do much for the people that are there. So, I mean, that's the sort of regime change, and then you're good for maybe 15, 20 years with that person. Then they get overthrown, and some other one comes into place, or something like that. I mean,
And all this is, an interesting target, so to speak. Tim, we got not one but two carriers on the way. The newspaper reported we have F-35s and other fighters and AWACS on the way. And Trump is really rattling sabers this time. Where does the possibility of an attack fit here? He's talking about, knocking off the rest of their nuclear initiative, even though he said he had essentially destroyed it the last time. Is that help? Is it really going to help? Is he going to put troops on the ground, or is he going to turn all that, military force around at some point, having achieved little or nothing?
Well, hopefully he's not taking advice from his advisors, Rubio or Hegseth or the like. This is no Venezuela. This will not be as easy as Venezuela if he decided to take a military action. I'm optimistic that in the Geneva discussions they had agreed on quote unquote guiding principles, a path forward. This is pretty much standard speak for negotiations that are just beginning, that you agree to a set of principles as you move forward and get into the details or into the weeds of the issues. So I don't see a attack forthcoming when you have statements from both sides saying that there's a path forward and there's guiding principles that have been agreed upon. Donald Trump, as you know, Jay, has a style of negotiation. We've talked about it before, the dead cat form of negotiations. You make the most outlandish, bizarre opening salvo in a negotiation, and then you come back to the table with something a little less extreme, and you get a lot further from what you want than maybe through traditional negotiation style. And Donald Trump seems to be very good at that. And this one is a big one because he's conjuring up military forces, which, by the way, cost a lot of money to get all the ships and the planes, and it's a huge budget impact to us. But there it is. That's his opening salvo of negotiations. And Donald didn't get the term taco for nothing. Trump always chickens out. He did it with tariffs, and most likely this was just all for show. That's my hope. And if it's not, we're all in deep kimchi, as you like to say.
Well, yeah, but remember that they were working on a nuclear bomb, and maybe they have achieved at least some nuclear capability. This could be a nuclear war, or at least a widespread regional war, and Trump has said that. He has said he's ready for war. He's ready for a weeks-long regional war with this, and that backs up his actions in bringing the carriers and the aircraft in. So the question is, what will he do? What will he do with all that military force? Will he bomb the nuclear facilities again? Will he bomb Tehran? Will he do precision bombing to bomb the leadership there and thus achieve regime change by assassinating the leadership? What's he going to do with it? I mean, I agree with you. The great likelihood is he's just going to turn it all around. But for the moment, he's threatening a war. Mm-hmm. So what kind of war is that?
It could be like the first strike, a limited strike, with the help of Israel. I can see Israel taking place in this limited strike, again, making sure that which they thought they were going to knock out in the first strike, which I don't think they did, maybe they try to finish the job, and this is an excuse to do it.
He could achieve a better public relations result if he could actually do it.
He would have to prove that he actually took out the nuclear capabilities of Iran, which I don't think he was successful months ago. I just don't think anyone believes that all the nuclear capabilities of Iran were abolished or demolished with the help of Israel and the U.S. strikes.
Manfred, it's really hard to figure out what Trump's objectives are here. I mean, as usual, he's opaque, and he changes his mind. Given those two characteristics, it's really hard to know what he really wants. So what does he want? Does he want control of the oil? After all, Iran is exporting 80% of its oil to China. Trump doesn't like that too much. Does he want to control the Middle East? Does he want to do this for the sake of democracy? Does he want to do this for somehow to achieve, I don't want to say peace, but the Mediterranean Riviera, settle things down so he can build hotels on the Riviera? Why is he doing this? Is there any reason that comes to mind?
Look, I have not the slightest idea. I am as good at reading his mind as you are. And nobody knows what is going on in his head. But you see, one thing that we should also talk about is the internal situation in Iran. I mean, the casualty rate of the demonstrations, the 7,000 that have been killed during these protests, are an indication that you have a lot of opposition build up and building, continuing to build in Iran. So when you're talking at the most dramatic regime change that have happened recently, they were, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, I mean, in the Russian scene with Gorbachev, it was not successful because Putin takes then over. But in many of the other Eastern European countries, including East Germany, the Czechoslovakia at that time, I mean, why today the Czech Republic and Slovakia has become authoritarian. It begins, Havel takes over in 1990, and I was 92 in Prague, and I did not understand why Czechoslovakia fell apart. Why did Havel not succeed in keeping the Slovakia together with the Czech Republic? So what you have, I mean, you had a tremendous movement in all of these countries, but it was the importance of the civil society being successful, being able of taking over, and that, it seems, has not so far happened in Iran, and it's not happened. Most of the potential opponents, are in exile in Germany and other places. Whether they are capable of really creating a successful revolutionary movement, not only against the clerics, who are all close to death anyway, being senile as they are, but they have to deal with the revolutionary guards. And I do not see, in armed civil society in Iran at this point emerging. I may be wrong. I don't know enough about Iran to understand this potential self-empowerment of the Iranian civil society, with whether the bombing of certain places in Iran by the U.S. will contribute to this formation. I don't know.
Let me ask you this. We did see a lot of protesters, 200,000 in Munich. We know there were protests against the theocracy, the Iranian theocracy, in other countries, Australia, Greece, Turkey, England, which called for regime change. And we also know at the same time, this is a hard question, I'm sorry. We also know that Trump has burned up the possibility of alliances. So if he puts boots on the ground, if he actually goes in there and tries to help the protesters in Tehran, if he goes in there and tries to, have a land war, which seems unlikely, but it's possible, will he be able to achieve alliances? Will any of those countries in which these protests took place or are taking place, will they provide support for his war, or has he long passed that possibility by alienating everyone?
I think he has long passed that possibility by alienating everybody. And the Munich conference simply contributes to that, despite Rubio's somewhat less strident comments. But I mean, the substance of his talk in Munich was not all that different from what Vance said 1 year ago.
Yeah. So the question then, Tim, is whether we have a military that is properly armed and funded and so forth to actually mount a campaign against Iran? Do we have the resources? Do we really have the ships and the planes and the bombs and the ammunition and what have you? Do we have troops that could be on the ground, or are we really unable to do that? What do you think? And are we able to deal with the very likely possibility of retaliation by Iran should we attack?
Well, I think the part of the answer was answered just previously, and that is, with any warfare, you have to rely heavily on logistics, places to stage and use bases for, and we've blown our coalitions out of the water. No pun intended. We have destroyed our coalitions, and so the logistical nature of warfare means you need your coalition to help you in the logistics, and I don't think we have that. And so there's a big reason not to do this strike until you look. I mean, I'm going back to George Bush Sr. and the work on when the invasion of Kuwait, and all the logistical support that he had and the coalitions that he had developed in order to do that, to make it a successful strike. And I don't think Donald Trump has that. So, I don't think, the Saudis or anyone else is looking or itching for a full-out scale war with Iran. I just don't think it's in their best interest. And I think they've even protested, or they've sparked up that this is not such a great idea. So to answer your question, who knows what Donald Trump is up to? I just don't think that a full-blown warfare with Iran is going to A, solve any problems, and B, certainly not guarantee his Nobel Peace Prize next year.
The question actually also wraps around the possibility of negotiations. Right now, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are involved in negotiations. They have a pretty full plate in Geneva with Iran, with mediators from Oman. And the question is there any likelihood of success there, or is that dead on arrival, so to speak? Gene, why is Trump doing that when it seems so unlikely? What could be achieved? What is being achieved? These guys have never achieved any particular peace or truce up to this point. What does it mean that Trump does this? Is it only performative, or is it likely to lead to some half solution or no solution? What do you think?
Well, one of the things that we haven't brought into this discussion is his relationship with Israel and Israel's relationship to Iran. The main instigator in trying to pacify or neutralize Iran is Israel, is Netanyahu. He's got the most at stake. Because his Patriot missile defense is thin now, and he needs defense if they're going to, Netanyahu and Trump, who Netanyahu is his associate in this, attack Iran. And what they want to do is finish the job they started in June. In June, they had plans to actually eliminate the Ayatollah and the leaders of Iran and effect real regime change. That didn't take place. That is on the table right now. And I believe Trump would really like to do it. He knows that Iran is very unpopular in the world. He wants to turn around his numbers domestically and globally. And he sees the possibility of a Nobel Peace Prize here through war, oddly enough, but that's the way he thinks. And so, yes, there is a very strong possibility that he will go to war, and he won't want a ground war. And the problem is that the Sunni powers, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, are now at loggerheads. They're not friends anymore. And so things are coming apart in the Middle East. He wants his peace board to put them all together again, and he wants his place in history. So yes, he's got a different type of negotiation going on right now. Notice that the negotiators for Iran are also the same negotiators in Geneva for Ukraine. Think about that. You have two guys at the top. Of course, they each have teams. Kushner and Witkoff, neither of whom have any expertise actually in these cultures or in negotiation. And they are negotiating two of the toughest things in the world because these guys think in terms of transactions. They don't think in terms of depth. So we are in 2 weeks going to find out whether or not there's going to be an agreement or not. And Iran is probably the hardest country in the world besides North Korea to negotiate with because of their culture.
Where does Russia and China stand on all of this? I guess they never support the U.S. on anything. Are they actively supporting Iran? Jean, can you tell whether they are?
What is very noticeable is how quiet Russia is. How quiet is Russia right now and why? Because Iran is the proxy of Russia. And this makes me think that Russia would like to see the Ayatollahs out of there and would like the United States to take it on and get into a quagmire, because then it would have a stronger hand in Ukraine and Europe. So I think Russia's playing a very deep game here. And China isn't really that concerned, except that Iran has threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz. And 80% of Iran's oil goes, guess where? To China.
They would like to continue that, but Trump would like to stop that.
We've got our warships there to keep that strait open for China.
Ben, Jean touched on this, but I would like to ask you about the the domestic reaction to all of this. Yes, the Middle East is falling apart, but so is the U.S., Ben. We are disassembling ourselves under Trump.
Right.
And the question is, would the people in the United States, do the political people in the political establishment, would Congress support Trump in attacking Iran? Have they indicated they would? Have they stood on the sidelines? Will they continue to stand on the sidelines?
If there's an attack by the United States on Iran, the knee-jerk reaction in the United States Congress is generally to, quote unquote, rally around the flag. But that being said, I would think the impression I get from people in the States is they do not want a war. We've got enough things going on inside the United States that people are not particularly enamored of going to war on with what objective. I mean, the classic question always is going to be, right? Okay, say you do regime change, and then what happens the next day, right? What happens the next day? That's what the heavy thinkers always tend to ask, and usually the questions with people who want to go to war so easily is they don't have an answer for that next day, and so I would think, I would be surprised, but I would think that there's generally a lot of skepticism about a very unpopular president taking the country to war for what? I mean, he's very unpopular apparently from what the polls are, and not that he cares, but I just don't. I find it hard to see Americans being enthused about going to another war.
How would this affect the midterms? I know that's a hard question. They're coming soon, and the campaigns are ramping up, and Trump really wants his team to win, doing everything and anything he can, including undermining the media. How does this affect? How does this affect the way people in this country think and would vote in November?
I have a hard time knowing what the reaction would be. I mean, there will be the sort of rally behind the troops moment, right? But then it's the quick and dirty kind of look, it was clean thing, and then there's like the being caught in a quagmire thing, right? I think that if you were thinking a choice, looking at Iran, which way it would be going, I think that most people would think that it would be going towards quagmire more than just a quick and dirty in and out kind of thing. And I'm not, and so I don't see this having a positive effect on the midterms. The problem is that once we've got troops committed to something like that, whether the Democrats or Republicans are in the majorities, they tend to rally around the troops. And that's the issue that comes up of who is at the top of this thinking about what's going to happen the next day. I mean, you have, I would think, extremely inexperienced negotiators representing the United States going up against some of the most sophisticated negotiators in Iran and in Russia. And it's like having the third string going up against the varsity. I mean, now the third string's got a lot of big guns and all that. I'm not saying we don't, but the level of sophistication is not one that I think provides us much comfort. Now, granted, I'll say that the press, having been now hammered down into a certain sort of obeisance, bend the knee for the most part, would be touting all of this just like they did for the first Gulf War as sort of cheerleaders for everything that happened, right? But the point I'm just trying to make is that notwithstanding all that at the top levels of the elites and all that, on a day-to-day average American, are they worrying about this? No. They're worried about survival, living.
Tim, I've said before that we seem to be close to the midterms, and so this is something that we should consider as an element that will affect the vote. On the other hand, in many ways, we're far away from the midterms because, as you and I have discussed, Trump has a blackboard somewhere. He and Stephen Miller and others in his retinue have a blackboard with a list of distractions that, for example, would distract us from the Epstein files, that would distract us from his failure to make good on any of his promises, and distract us from what he is doing in other countries where he is violating sovereignty and the like. Remember, on that blackboard, we still have Venezuela, which isn't doing very well. There was an article in the paper about that. His fight with Panama, Canada, Greenland, and others, he's fighting with everybody. And all those things will pop up on that blackboard because he has to maintain primacy on the news. He has to be the top of the news cycle, every news cycle. And the news cycle, as we know, is what, a week, 2 weeks? So this cannot be a very long-term affair if you follow that kind of logic. Let's assume that he goes in there and does something ridiculous, not likely to succeed. But then he's got to move to something else, and he's got this blackboard. So, what about that? This is one distraction, but there are, a dozen others. How will they affect this? How will they affect his ability to have a continuing operation in Iran?
Well, I think Congress will actually step in. Look, we have a soaring national deficit. It's been advertised, it's been publicized that, the 1% is getting their tax breaks at the expense of people who are on, bare existence. Their medical benefits are being slashed. Now you're going to increase the national debt because of a military action, and Congress is not going to step in or say anything about it. I don't think that's likely. I think even Republicans are going to say, Mr. President, we can't afford this war. And I think I agree with you that Donald Trump has a blackboard, and it's very, very much filled with distractions to keep the Epstein off the front pages. But I don't think that gets him anywhere. I don't think that works for him any longer. The Epstein is in motion, and there's no putting that back in the box. So if that's his strategy, Jay, I don't think that serves him well. And the tail wags the dog works only so much in a limited way, but not with a full-blown war in Iran. Again, I kind of agree maybe with Gene that this could be a limited strike to finish the job of the first strike that wasn't completely successful. And as far as regime change, yeah, I'm sure that's on the table, but that's easier said than done.
Well, I don't know whether it's easier, but I think if the US and Israel target the leadership, if they get rid of Khamenei and some of the other senile clerics, you don't know what happens in the civil society of Iran. And I think simply to talk about attacks from outside and war without considering what these 90 million Iranians will do and the support they have in the exiled civil society of Iran, we don't know either. So I'm not that limiting the possibilities, to an invasion. But if Israel and the US target the leadership, we don't know what that will create within in Iran itself. And when you have seen these huge demonstrations, an uprising like the ones that we saw after 1989 in all Eastern European communist countries, and even for a certain period of time in the Soviet Union, I am not completely, I don't give up hope that you may have a revolution from within if this targeting takes place.
I just want to interject one thing here, is that I think to some extent Donald Trump juked the Iranian protesters, which is say there's going to be hell to pay if there's any protesters that are killed in the streets.
Right.
I think that encouraged more protests to take place. But as always, Donald Trump jukes them, which is to say you pivot right, you pivot left, and and they were encouraged to go out in the streets. And as a result, thousands of protesters have been murdered in the streets.
Yes.
So once again, the United States, via the United States president, has, its rhetoric has exceeded its ability to actually do something.
Right? Yeah, but when you read the reports about the reactions in Iran itself, it is quite extraordinary that you have there the potential for the politicization, a more successful politicization of Iranian civil society along the lines that you saw after 1989 in most of the former communist countries. But I'm speculating here as much as you do, as we all do.
Let me go to final comments because we're almost out of time. Let me start with Eugene. I guess the common thread here in this discussion is it doesn't seem like a great idea to attack Iran right now, and it's questionable whether Trump is getting good advice on the issue or will get good advice on the issue. Where do you think this is going, Gene? Will Iran ever be right? Will Trump really get any benefit out of his threats? What are your thoughts, and what are your final comments?
I think we'll know in short order, because you can't keep that much military might in one place in the globe unless you're going to cut or fish or cut bait. You have to make a decision. And the inclination is in 2 weeks, Iran is supposed to come back to the negotiating table with a plan. And the United States is supposed to have a plan. And if they don't reach an agreement, then things might get very kinetic. But if they get kinetic, they'll be short-lived, because Trump doesn't want to get embroiled in a real war. He wants to strike, like the strike in June. But they're saying it will be heavier because Iran is now saying it will close the Strait of Hormuz and it will attack American bases. Consequently, we've really amassed a much greater amount of firepower than we did before. And I think that Trump has somehow told Russia to stay on the sidelines. And so I think the possibilities of most of the people that are looking at this that have some expertise think there's a 50 to 75% chance that Trump will strike Iran if he doesn't get the deal he wants. And Netanyahu doesn't get the deal he wants. He wants the missiles as well as the nuclear capability taken out of Iran. And I don't think Iran is going to stand for that, because they're coming from a theological point of view where God is in control, not rationality. And so we're just here on tenterhooks. And the tendency is, I think, for there to be war. And of course, everybody will breathe a sigh of relief if there isn't.
Well, Ben, suppose there isn't. I've noticed that Trump seems to rotate these days. He creates a dramatic incident, a dramatic policy change in the U.S., and then he goes and disrupts things elsewhere, like, say in Europe, and then he comes back to the U.S., and it's basically a 2-week cycle. Do you agree? And do you think that once this settles down, not saying it will, but if it settles down, once it settles down, we'll be back to the U.S. and he'll do something outrageous here? What are your thoughts? And what are your final comments?
Going along the lines with that thought, I do believe that there is some strategy of Trump, which is to essentially use the broader foreign affairs powers of the presidency to then create emergencies that he can invoke for domestic purposes too, saying he needs to use emergency powers. So that's the dance back and forth, sort of between what he does on the international side and then invoking that as part of dealing with domestic things. For example, I don't know, let's take Venezuela, or let's take now with Cuba. There's an emergency thing that's going on there, my final thoughts on this is that Trump is going to declare a win no matter what happens in 2 weeks or whatever, and everything's going to basically move to something else. I don't know what something else will be, but all he wants to do is to be able to declare a win. It's all performative. The idea that there would be some actual American troops who get killed, if it can't be hidden, he's not interested in being the one who's caused those deaths. Not that he really cares about the particular troops, but more that he just doesn't think it looks good for him. So that's that's what I think is what's going to happen at the end of the days. Maybe a little bit of kinetic. I'll give Gene absolutely that's some little kinetic to make it look a little sort of macho and all that. But at the same time, essentially declare a win. And I think the Iranians are good enough at this game to make him think he had a win, as many countries around the world have already done with him for many different things, to make him think he had a win, and then he goes away as a happy camper and they keep doing what they want to do. I would want to say one thing that I should emphasize. There seems to be something going on between a lot of those middle states very rapidly. I'm hearing about the Canadians tying up with the Europeans, tying up with 12 nations in Asia on a whole different plane of orientation from the United States. So there's a lot of moving parts that we may be not aware of that we should watch too, because I think he's played with fire a little too much, and the world is adjusting rapidly on him.
I don't know why, but this reminds me of the Ed Sullivan show back in the 50s and the 60s, where they had these guys who would spin plates on sticks. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, sure.
And the idea was you want to have as many sticks and as many plates as you could possibly do, and everyone would be excited and they would applaud if the performer could spin a lot of plates on a lot of sticks. And I think right now Trump has a lot of plates and a lot of sticks going on. So really, it's anybody's guess about which plate is going to fall off, which plate is going to succeed, if any. It's like watching a reality show, isn't it? Manfred, what are your final thoughts on this?
With or without a successful Israeli or American intervention, military intervention in Tehran, in Iran, I have some hope for an explosion within the Iranian civil society, and that you get a cleansing from within with the support of the huge refugee exile population of Iranians all over Europe, especially in Germany.
Okay. Tim, you have the last word. What are your thoughts? Where are we going here? And will we hear more about this, or will it simply slide under the waves in 2 weeks?
I don't think negotiations going to give Donald Trump what he wants. I do agree with Ben, though. He's going to declare victory no matter what happens. I think a big part of what may occur in the next couple of weeks is Donald Trump's desperate attempt to make sure he's not defined as taco. Trump always chickens out. So I think there might be, and I agree with Gene, that there may be some small kinetic action that takes place. It's not dissimilar to what Iran did against Israel. They had some targeted strikes. Those strikes were non-consequential or inconsequential, and it was a token gesture. And I think that Donald Trump has put himself in a corner here with all the military might that's been positioned here, and something has to occur to save face for Donald Trump.
Well, it could happen on any one of those plates and sticks. And for that matter, it could happen with Russia and China while he's busy dealing with the emergencies and contentions that he creates. We'll have to leave it there, though. Thanks to our co-host, Tim Apicella. Thanks so much to our guests, Benjamin Davis, Gene Rosenfeld, Manfred Henningsen. I'm Jay Fidell, host of Keeping the World Company. The title of this episode is, Will Trump Really Attack Iran? Thanks to our viewers for watching. We'll see you again soon for the next one. Aloha.